over the phone about his study of UFOs, and he's pretty nuts and bolts, and not really into the paranormal. But during the show, there was people talking about how, man, it was that background noises almost sounded like something you get EVPs or something. And my daughter, who did the show with me, co-host, she said, "Let's go ahead and set up the ghost box." And I was like, "Yeah, I didn't really want to," but she insisted that she thought it sounded kind of strange too, the background. So noise. So I went ahead and got the speakers and the radio and hooked up, all that up, and got the digital recorder, and we did us a little session. And after 2 or 3 minutes, didn't seem to be getting anything, and I says, "Look, if you want, if you'll just say this person's name, Richard Hoffman, I'll go ahead and send him the audio." And a voice came through and said, "Rich Hoffman." And
okay, my hair is
and
standing
so
up right now.
I sent it to him. I sent it to him, and then I played it at his group. And then later on, he wanted me to come back, talk UFOs, but he says, "Please don't mention EVPs or poltergeists again," even though the group was excited to hear this audio. And what happened was when he wrote me back, I says, it broke off at Rich, and then I got Hoffman. And so I only got Rich Hoffman instead of Richard Hoffman. And he says, "Brent, years ago when we met, you were introduced by a person who always called me Richard Hoffman up in Ohio. But," he said, "most everybody calls me simply Rich." So the voice was right.
Yeah.
And for a while there, I could just we'd be doing a spare box, and I would stop what I was doing, and I'd say, "Okay, can you say Rich Hoffman again?" And this voice would come through, and then it was saying Richard Hoffman, being difficult, I guess. But I remember I got one where my daughter says, "Oh, that gives me the chills." So for a while, we could be, we could be here in the house, or we could be off in the field somewhere. And I would, while we were doing our regular investigation, I would just interrupt a moment and say, "Can you say Richard Hoffman?" And for a while, they would do it. So.
Well, you got to be careful, with that, because, like Ouija boards. My first marriage, I had a very, very bad situation with my first wife. She was into Ouija boards, and I didn't even know it till I came home one day early from work, and there's a group of people in my living room, and, boy, they were living pretty much by what they're being told on the Ouija board. And I came to the conclusion, you don't know if the entity you're talking to is the real entity. It could be a demon. It could be, somebody feeding you false information and all that stuff. All I know is it didn't take long and our marriage just went downhill. Everything bad. When she found that Ouija board happened, and it got to a point, I'll be honest with you, I got so mad that I took it and donated it to a thrift shop. And next thing I know, I come home a couple days later, and guess what was in the front room again? One of the guys in her little group with the Ouija board went into a thrift store and found it. It's like, just I should have burnt it. I think I actually did finally burn it. But you got to watch out for, anything like that, because
I know somebody down in Florida years ago told me they had trouble, and they took the Ouija board out and burned it in a barrel, and said it was making a screaming sound as a burn, because maybe it was, but it said it sounded like a person screaming.
Well, that would be enough to go, wow. Yeah, I don't know. Hey, Michael, you're awful quiet out there.
I don't think they mess with it anymore.
Now, John Lear, I want to talk a little bit about UFOs. I got a thing today from John Lear. He's stating that, Buzz Aldrin admitted that the moon landing was fake, that we never landed on the moon. Now, this is coming from Buzz Aldrin himself.
But that was what he told John Lear, right?
He told John Lear, but he also has told quite a few people that.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a hard time with that. um, I believe we've been to the moon. I never have heard a recording of Buzz Aldrin saying that, but maybe he did. Maybe whatever reason, but I don't know. I just don't. There's some wild conspiracy stuff. I think wild that's out there. I've always just kind of attributed the fake moon landing story as one of those things. I know. I know back in the 70s there was a manuscript somebody gave me that somebody was trying to sell about the fake moon landing scenario, and it just didn't seem like the evidence was there. But maybe somebody's got something that'll convince me.
Well, after I got that today, I did make a couple phone calls, and I did talk to a scientist, and they told me that realistically, back in that time frame, that they themselves find it very hard to believe that we could have actually gone to the moon because the radiation would have been lethal. We couldn't have, even our technology back then, we wouldn't have been able to protect the astronauts. Now, that's what he was telling me today. And this is from somebody from the University of Washington in their science department.
You know, Gary, I've got a thought on that same subject as well, if I can jump in here for a second.
That's what you're here for.
Yeah. Hey, Brent, thanks for all this great info. I love your history on this whole, paranormal and the subject that you're an expert in. But my thoughts on the moon landing are this. I'm a lawyer. You try to think analytically and try to have proof of what you're, coming up with on theories, and that's exactly what you were talking about, Brent. But the timeline for me is just astonishing. For instance, 1959, the Russians beat us into space with Sputnik. They actually orbit the Earth, but that's about it. They then, with the succeeding years, were able to put, dogs, and then we put Ham the monkey up, shortly thereafter that. And then in 1960, John F. Kennedy says, we're going to the moon, just to kind of bring some competitive spirit into the thing, because we were a little bit behind the Russians at that point in 1960. And then when you think that 9 years later, we actually land on the moon, July of 1969, it was just fascinating to me to think that we caught up that quickly and were able to actually accomplish, that kind of an effort in such a short period of time. Now, I'm not saying that we did not land on the moon. I'm just saying that it's very suspect that we actually landed on the moon in 1969.
Okay. Well, I just always assumed we, good old American ingenuity, and we just caught up. Plus, we had some great German scientists working with us that we got throughout, Operation Paperclip there. So,
yeah,
I don't know.
But, it seems to me, and even today it kind of bears this out, is that it seems that the Russians got the better Nazi scientists than we did, because we are even today still using their rocket boosters to get up out of space. It seems to me that you're right. They had kind of a little bit of a jump start on us for some reason, and then our program had to catch up. But it's always fascinating. There was one thing I wanted to follow up on with you if I could, and it's because you have this historical reference of some of the giants in parapsychology and the paranormal studies of John Keel, Brad Steiger. You were actually corresponding with these guys and had a personal point of view of how, they did their work. And you mentioned how John Keel would actually take long walks, and that was kind of one of his things. And maybe he got, a better way of clearing his mind or even downloads, on those walks. But there's one thing I thought that would be interesting to have you comment on. John Keel in the Mothman Prophecies made that unique kind of scene where he gets a phone call, the investigator gets a phone call in a motel room from some kind of a mechanical voice talking to him ahead of time about the disaster that was going to happen in Point Pleasant with the bridge collapsing. Have you ever had any phone calls that were strange yourself in your long history of paranormal studies?
Personally, no, not anything that I really. I know a number of people certainly have, but not me. That was something. I had someone that called up and had this weird noise in the background and somebody screaming, but I think that was probably a prank on me by someone local because they just knew that I was into this kind of stuff. And, the call started off with Brent Raynes, and I said yes, and then all the weird background noises started.
Have you ever had, for instance, we're talking EVPs, and your experience, at least with knowing what is an EVP and what isn't? I just got to thinking, in any of your phone interviews or any of your conversations over the phone, have you ever received something that could be an EVP in that kind of situation?
There have been a couple of times I kind of wondered, but then, I don't know what was, going on the other end. So, we did have, that conversation with Rich Hoffman that a couple of people wrote me afterwards and said, the background noises almost sounded like one of your ghost box sessions. And my daughter thought it sounded kind of odd. And so that's why we did the ghost box. I never really thought that much about it at the time, but we did get the Rich Hoffman response, which was highly unusual because I had no sooner asked, if they could repeat it, I'll send them a copy, and then bam, there it was. And some of these things just happen right after you say it. And I was being interviewed by somebody with MUFON once, and I don't think they ever used the interview, but they wanted to know about my EVPs, and that was early on. That was just the same year that I first started getting them. And he says, come on now. I said, you're a lot of times, maybe 2-3 minutes after you ask a question, say you get some radio person says yes or no, and you might base it on that. I said, no, you don't understand. What I'm looking for is when I get a response, maybe a few seconds, but it's immediate and it's very specific. It's not just yes or no, And I said, that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I had gotten. For about 4 years there, I spent a lot of time, maybe did 1 or 2 sessions a week here at the house or in the field. But I finally kind of got burned out on it. I figured, what am I going to prove? I mean, I've proven that there's an interactive, specific responses that do occasionally happen, but there's a lot of other research to be done. So,
right.
Every once in a while I'll engage in the process, especially if it's something that I think. But it was like someone had told me who also had read a lot of Keel. He says this fits the Keel thing quite well. The trickster element. He says you're spending all this time trying to get more and specific, and it keeps leading you on, but it never gives you anything that's really really big. It's just
right.
Just little hints of things, enough to keep me and some others, playing the radio and recording the sessions and seeing what we get. But we get some anomalies and it keeps us going. But, a lot of evidence besides that to be pursued as well. So,
yeah.
Now it's just occasionally.
One last.
Yeah.
One additional question on that subject, Brent. I've heard of this phenomena where you're thinking of a question that you're going to ask in an EVP situation, and you almost just get it out verbally, and it's answered immediately. I mean, almost immediately, almost as if they are able to even read your mind on what you are about to ask. Have you ever experienced that, where the answer or the EVP is almost immediate.